Eugenie Bouchard. Eugenie Bouchard was supposed to be the player who carried Canadian tennis into a new era. In 2012, she won the Wimbledon junior title, instantly putting her name on the radar. Just a year later, the WTA named her Newcomer of the Year, and by 2014, she was delivering on the hype with consistent results at the top level. At just 20 years old, Bouchard stormed into the semifinals of the Australian Open and Roland Garros before making history at Wimbledon, reaching the final against Petra Kvitova. Although she lost in straight sets, the buzz around her was insane. She had a fearless baseline game, powerful ground strokes, and a mental edge that made her look like a future multi-slam champion. By October 2014, she hit a career-high ranking of world number 5, the highest ever by a Canadian woman at the time. But here's the reality. Despite all the hype, Bouchard won just one career singles title, the Nuremberg Cup in 2014. That breakthrough season turned out to be her peak. The collapse came fast. At the 2015 US Open, Bouchard slipped and hit her head in a darkened locker room, suffering a concussion that derailed her career. The injury left lingering effects, and even though she later won a lawsuit against the USTA, the momentum was gone. Her results plummeted. Early round exits became the norm, confidence faded, and even when healthy, she struggled to rebuild the consistency that once made her so dangerous. There were attempts at comebacks. A quarterfinal run in Istanbul in 2020 offered a brief glimpse of hope, but the power and precision that carried her in 2014 never truly returned. By the early 2020s, injuries piled up again, including a serious shoulder problem that required surgery. In 2024, Bouchard began shifting toward pickleball, a sign that her tennis chapter was closing. And in 2025, she made it official, announcing her farewell to the sport, choosing Montreal as the place where her career would end. For all the attention and early breakthroughs, the record is clear. One singles title, one slam final, and a career defined more by what might have been than what actually was. Gaël Monfils. Gaël Monfils might be the greatest showman tennis has ever seen, but he could have been so much more. As a junior, he was unstoppable. 3 slam titles in 2004 at the Australian Open, Roland Garros, and Wimbledon, finishing the year as the world's top junior. France believed they had found their next slam champion, a natural successor to Yannick Noah. Monfils had it all: the athleticism of a sprinter, the flair of an entertainer, and the charisma to fill stadiums. On the Pro Tour, the results were solid, but never reached the heights expected. Monfils achieved a career-high ranking of number 6 in 2016, collected 13 ATP singles titles, and reached the semifinals of Roland Garros in 2008 and the US Open in 2016. He was also twice a finalist at the Paris Masters, giving French fans hope for a breakthrough on home soil. His highlight reel is legendary: diving volleys, airborne forehands, and sliding recoveries that turned routine rallies into viral clips. But for all the entertainment, Monfils never delivered the slam run people were waiting for. His biggest setbacks were injuries. His game depended on extreme athleticism, and his knees, ankles, and back often broke down under the strain. The timing of those injuries cost him rhythm, consistency, and the ability to string together dominant seasons. Even when healthy, Monfils was unpredictable, capable of beating top 5 players one week and losing in straight sets to a random player, barely scraping the top 100 the next. And yet, Monfils has shown remarkable longevity. In January 2025, at the age of 38, he won the title in Auckland, becoming the oldest ATP champion in nearly half a century. It was proof of his enduring talent, but it also highlighted the paradox of his career: a player who could last decades at the top level without ever reaching a slam final or winning a Masters 1000 title. When people look back, Monfils will be remembered as a fan favorite and highlight machine. But when measured against his junior dominance, the gap is obvious. He was supposed to be a slam winner. Instead, he became the game's ultimate entertainer. Hyun Chung. In 2017, Hyun Chung looked like the next big thing to come out of men's tennis. He won the inaugural Next Gen ATP Finals, showcasing his rock-solid baseline game and mental toughness against the brightest young talents on tour. But his real breakthrough came a few months later at the 2018 Australian Open. At just 21 years old, Chung stunned the tennis world by defeating Novak Djokovic in straight sets in the fourth round, then powering into the semifinals. He was the first Korean player ever to reach a Grand Slam semifinal, and the hype was immediate. Chung was being called a future top 10 mainstay. His game had all the pieces: incredible defensive skills, laser flat ground strokes, and the composure of a veteran. But that magical Australian Open run ended painfully. Facing Roger Federer in the semifinals, Chung was forced to retire with severe blisters on his feet, a detail that symbolized what was to come: his body breaking down just as his potential was peaking. Chung reached a career-high ranking of world number 19 in April 2018, but injuries began piling up fast. Persistent back problems and Achilles issues kept him sidelined for months at a time. After Roland Garros in 2020, he virtually disappeared from the ATP Tour. When he did reappear, it was mostly in doubles, trying to find a way back without stressing his fragile body. In early 2025, there was a glimmer of hope when he won a small ITF M25 event, his first title of any kind in years. But it was a long way from Melbourne Park under the bright slam lights. The contrast couldn't be sharper. From taking out Djokovic and electrifying the biggest events in tennis, to spending most of his mid-20s battling injuries. Chung's story is simple. The prodigy was real. The talent was undeniable, but his body never let him prove it. Mario Ancic. Mario Ancic's rise was fast, dramatic, and filled with promise. At just 18 years old, in his very first Wimbledon main draw match in 2002, he stunned the tennis world by defeating Roger Federer, who was already on the brink of breaking into the elite. That upset set the stage for what looked like the start of a special career. 2 years later, in 2004, Ancic powered his way to the Wimbledon semifinals, reinforcing the belief that Croatia had found another star to follow in the footsteps of Goran Ivanišević. Ancic's game was built for grass and fast courts, a huge serve, crisp volleys, and a calm on-court demeanor that earned him the nickname Super Mario. He showed the tennis world his potential was more than just the hype. He backed it up with big results. By 2006, he reached a career-high ranking of world number 7, won 3 ATP singles titles, helped Croatia claim the 2005 Davis Cup, and even picked up an Olympic bronze medal in doubles at Athens 2004. Everything pointed to a career filled with slam finals and possibly titles. But just as his trajectory peaked, illness struck. In 2007, Ancic was diagnosed with mononucleosis, the same virus that derailed other careers like Robin Soderling's. He missed long stretches of the tour, tried to come back, only to relapse or suffer injuries that kept him from building momentum. The constant health battles robbed him of his prime years, forcing him to retire in 2011 at just 26 years old. Off the court, Ancic transitioned successfully, completing law degrees and moving into finance. But in tennis, his story became one of the ultimate what-ifs. Beating Federer at Wimbledon as a teenager, reaching slam semifinals, and climbing to number 7 in the rankings, Ancic had the resume of a future champion. But his career never reached the heights it should have, undone not by lack of talent or desire, but by circumstances outside his control. Richard Gasquet. Richard Gasquet was called the Mozart of tennis before he was even a teenager. At just 9 years old, his face appeared on the cover of France's tennis magazine, with the headline suggesting he was the champion the country had been waiting for. France, desperate for another men's slam winner since Yannick Noah's 1983 Roland Garros triumph, put the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders. With a silky, one-handed backhand that many consider one of the most beautiful strokes ever, Gasquet was seen as destined for greatness. And for a while, he looked on track. Gasquet made his ATP debut at just 15 years old, and by his early 20s, he was climbing the ranks. His peak came in July 2007, when he hit a career-high ranking of number 7. Over the course of his career, he won 16 ATP singles titles, surpassed 600 match wins, and made 3 Grand Slam semifinals: Wimbledon in 2007 and 2015. and the US Open in 2013. Those results alone would make for a very respectable career. But the missing piece was obvious. Gasquet never reached a slam final. Whenever he faced the very best, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, he came up short. His elegant style dazzled in highlights, but it didn't translate into the dominance many predicted. He became a symbol of consistency without breakthrough, good enough to regularly reach the second week of slams, but not good enough to go the distance. In 2025, after more than 2 decades on tour, Gasquet retired at Roland Garros, his home slam. He left behind a legacy of longevity, artistry, and quiet professionalism. But when compared to the expectations set for him as a child prodigy, the gap was impossible to ignore. Gasquet will always be remembered for that backhand and his flair, but his story is also a reminder that even immense talent and early promise don't guarantee slam glory. He was almost always there, just never quite at the top. Mirjana Lucic-Baroni. In the late 1990s, Mirjana Lucic-Baroni looked like the next Monica Seles. At just 15 years old, she won her first WTA title in bowl in 1997. 2 years later, barely 17 years old, she blasted her way to the Wimbledon semifinals, defeating top players like Monica Seles and Natalie Tauziat with a fearless power game. She became the youngest player to win a WTA doubles title, the youngest to win the Australian Open women's doubles crown, with Martina Hingis in 1998, and reached a career-high ranking of world number 19 in doubles and 32 in singles before her 18th birthday. Tennis insiders were convinced she was a future Grand Slam champion, but then she disappeared. After 1999, Lucic-Baroni's name virtually vanished from the tour. The reason, revealed years later, was harrowing. She fled her home, escaping an abusive and controlling father who managed her career and personal life with violence and intimidation. Without financial support, she couldn't sustain the expenses of professional tennis. For nearly a decade, her career was put on hold. When she returned sporadically in the mid-2000s, the tennis world had moved on. For most prodigies, that would have been the end of the story. But Lucic-Baroni's tale took an extraordinary twist. Against all odds, she mounted one of the sport's most remarkable comebacks. Nearly 20 years after her teenage breakthrough, she stunned the tennis world by reaching the 2017 Australian Open semifinals at age 34, showing the same fearless hitting that once made her a prodigy. Still, the comeback couldn't rewrite the lost years. The potential of a top 10 and the chance of having a slam-winning career were gone. Her story remains defined less by her results and more by the dramatic gap between what she could have been and what her circumstances allowed her to achieve. Bernard Tomic. When Bernard Tomic announced himself to the tennis world, he was tipped by many to become Australia's next superstar. At just 15 years old, he won the 2008 Australian Open boys singles title, making him the youngest champion in the event's history. 3 years later, in 2011, Tomic reached the quarterfinals at Wimbledon as an 18-year-old, the youngest man to do so since Boris Becker. His blend of touch, court sense, and unorthodox shot-making convinced many that Australia had found its next slam champion. By 2016, Tomic reached his career-high ranking of world number 17 and had collected 4 ATP titles. His pragmatic style, flat ground strokes, disguised slices, and impeccable anticipation seemed built to frustrate opponents. On pure talent, he looked capable of climbing even higher. But instead of climbing, Tomic spiraled. His defining moment came at Wimbledon 2017, when he lost in the first round against Misha Zverev and told reporters afterward that he was bored and had no motivation. The admission triggered a storm of criticism. His racket sponsor dropped him, Tennis Australia distanced itself, and his reputation never recovered. Tomic doubled down in later interviews, openly saying he played for money rather than love of the sport. The results reflected the mindset. His ranking plummeted outside the top 200, and while he occasionally resurfaced on the ATP Tour, most of his matches came at lower-tier Challenger and Futures events. Controversy, not consistency, became the headline, whether it was public spats with his father, clashes with tennis officials, or reality TV appearances. For a player who once looked like a slam contender, the gap between potential and outcome couldn't be wider. Instead of becoming Australia's next great champion, Tomic became a cautionary tale about talent without dedication. Donald Young. In the mid-2000s, Donald Young was hailed as the savior of American men's tennis. He was barely 16 years old when he became the youngest ever world junior #1 in 2005. That same year, he won the Australian Open junior title, and 2 years later added the Wimbledon juniors crown. The US media hyped him as the next Andre Agassi or Andy Roddick, and the USTA invested heavily in his development. By the time he turned pro, expectations were sky high. But translating junior dominance to the ATP Tour proved far more difficult. Young's left-handed game had finesse, touch, and variety, but he lacked the consistent weapons to trouble the very best. He received wildcard after wildcard into big events, but more often than not, he fell early. Crowds and commentators began questioning whether the hype had been overblown. His breakthrough finally seemed to come in 2011, when Young reached the 4th round of the US Open, upsetting Stan Wawrinka in a 5-set battle in the 2nd round. He followed it with his first ATP final in Bangkok that same year. For a moment, it looked like he was ready to deliver on the years of promise. By the end of 2011, he had climbed to a career-high ranking of world number 39. But the momentum didn't last. Young never won an ATP singles title. He reached another final in Delray Beach in 2015, but once again fell short, this time to Ivo Karlovic. His best slam results remained sporadic 4th-round runs, and he never cracked the top 30. In doubles, he found more success, even reaching the 2017 Roland Garros final alongside his doubles partner, Santiago Gonzalez. But in singles, the stage where he was supposed to shine, he became stuck as a journeyman. By the late 2010s, Donald Young faded from the main tour, unable to hold a ranking high enough to consistently compete at ATP events. Anna Kournikova. Few players in tennis history became as famous, as fast as Anna Kournikova. She made her WTA debut at just 14 years old in 1995, and by 1997, she shocked the tennis world by reaching the Wimbledon semifinals on her very first appearance there, at just 16 years of age. She was the first woman to reach the semis at Wimbledon on their first try since Chris Evert in 1972. With her power, movement, and charisma, she was instantly labeled a future slam champion. Sponsors lined up, magazine covers followed, and she became one of the most recognizable names in global sports. Kournikova's game had real strengths. She was quick around the court, had aggressive ground strokes, and her doubles instincts were world-class. At her peak, she climbed to world number 8 in singles on the 20th of November 2000. And even more impressively, she became world number 1 in doubles in 1999, partnering with Martina Hingis. Together, they won 16 WTA doubles titles, including back-to-back Australian Opens in 1999 and 2002. But the story in singles was entirely different. Despite all the hype, Kournikova never won a single WTA singles title. She made 4 finals, but each time fell short. While she was talented enough to reach the top 10, even without winning a singles title, she struggled with consistency and often failed to beat the very best players when it mattered most. Her career was also cut short by injuries. Chronic back problems and spinal issues forced her to retire in 2003 at just 22 years old. For a player once seen as the next dominant star in women's tennis, her singles resume ended with no titles and no slam finals. Of course, off the court, Kournikova's fame skyrocketed. She became one of the most searched names on the internet, transcending the sport in ways few players ever had. But that fame also overshadowed her tennis. So, this was it for today. What do you think? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next one.